because the volcano that's creating these conditions mostly underwater, and again, more than 5,700 miles away from Seattle. This is an advisory. This isn't a warning. So again, that's just shy of a warning. And again, we got to stay out of the away from the waters and away from the shores. I love breaking down the timing, the impacts, helping you really understand what this alert really means for all of us in these impacted communities. And I'm really excited to introduce you to a top tsunami expert in our state, Corina Allen, working with the Washington Geological Survey and DNR. We're so glad to have you with us this morning. Corina, can you walk us through what people can expect with these conditions this morning?
I sure can. As you mentioned, the tsunami wave is starting to hit the Washington coastline. The first wave arrived at 8:40 this morning at Long Beach, and we're expecting the first wave to hit Port Townsend at 9:55 this morning. What we're seeing from Hawaii and from Alaska, who received these tsunami waves before we are, is that the first wave is definitely not the largest. In Hawaii, the 14th wave was the largest, and in Alaska, so far the 18th wave is the largest. These waves are arriving in Washington as the tide is increasing and it's becoming high tide. In many of these coastal communities, high tide is around 10:15, 10:30 this morning. So these tsunami waves will arrive with the rising tide. And so the message is that we're expecting 1 to 3 foot tsunami waves on top of this high tide. And so that could cause strong currents, large waves on beaches. So the message is to stay out of the water, away from beaches, away from harbors and marinas, and prepare for strong and unusual currents as this event progresses. We're not able to provide wave arrivals or current estimates from the Tsunami Warning Center for the Puget Sound or inland waters. They don't have that forecasting ability. And it's really, as you mentioned, a unique event and one that we don't see very often. And so understanding what an underwater volcanic eruption so far away means for Washington is something that we are assessing and learning about as the waves come in.
This is
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is an exceptional event, right? So the last time we had tsunami conditions back in about 2011 is what I was told. So it's been several years since we've seen conditions and been vulnerable to this kind of risk. So right now, this advisory, it doesn't apply to many of the big spots in Puget Sound, like Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, and Olympia. Is there any chance that the advisory could be extended to some of those communities?
With an advisory, there's always a chance that the alert level could be upgraded or downgraded based on what the Tsunami Warning Center has seen in other places. I don't think they anticipate to change that alert level at this time. However, it can always be changed as we get more information.
Okay, that makes sense. And then let's talk about how long this might stick around. You were touching on that a little bit earlier, but what can people expect for communities underneath this advisory?
Yes, so this is a multiple wave event that will last for many, many hours. And so Hawaii is 8 hours into their advisory now, and they're still seeing advisory level, so the 1 to 3 foot waves in Hawaii. And for an advisory to be canceled, there has to be 3 hours after that 1 to 3 foot increase in normal tidal stage wave conditions. And so this is something that will be happening on the Washington coast for many hours. It will continue through this afternoon.
Great. So I'm going to be updating my forecast then. You know, earlier I had been hearing that Hawaii seeing those conditions for 3 hours and to expect that kind of length of time for us here locally. But you're saying they've had 8 hours of these tsunami advisory conditions, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, got it. And then let's talk about the sirens quickly. We were talking about this right before your interview, but can you just kind of go over whether or not an advisory means that these sirens go off along the coast?
Yes. So the sirens that you see along the coast are to warn people of a tsunami, and those are not automatically triggered for an advisory level event. They are automatically triggered and turned on for a warning level event. And so the sirens are not turned on at the statewide level for this event. Local jurisdictions may choose to use the sirens to relay messages to beaches or coastal communities, or to turn on the sirens themselves, but that is a local decision and is dependent on the conditions at those beaches and places.
Okay, and to recap again, in terms of how long these conditions might stick around, several hours. This isn't going to be done here by noon or 1 o'clock.
Correct. Yes, we're just starting to see the tsunami waves arrive. The wave has hit in La Push now, and we're just starting to see the tide gauges pick up the tsunami wave in Westport and Nia Bay, but they're not significant sizes yet. So as I mentioned, this is a multiple wave event, and in other places, the 14th, 18th wave is the largest. So we're just seeing the first wave hit Washington now. So it's going to be several hours before we can fully understand the impacts. So please stay away from the beaches and the ports and the harbors and marinas. This is going to be going on for a long time today.
And Corina, I have one last question before I send things over to my colleague Brian Flores here, but I just wanted to ask you, so 1 to 3 feet, that's the range of what we're expecting with these tsunami waves. What would you say to people who think that kind of range is really unimpressive? Why are tsunami waves just so dangerous?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 1 to 3 feet on top of a high tide, you can think of that as a very strong king tide or strong storm surge. There are reports from Hawaii of a similar wave lifting boats and putting them on the dock and in the harbors. So it is a large wave. It's not the 2011 Tohoku style tsunami wave that you imagine, but it has very strong currents. It's a very powerful wave and it's unpredictable. And so if you're out at the beach or thinking about going to the beach, you may look at it and say, oh, it's not that bad, but you never know what the next wave can bring. And so these are very powerful, strong waves that impact the coast and the waterways and harbors and marinas. So it is important to stay away because they are unpredictable and they are very powerful.
We're expecting waves of waves, rounds of waves here. Corina, so glad to have you with us. Brian, having a question for you too.
Yeah, Corina, thanks for joining us as always. We appreciate your expertise on this. A couple of questions here that I have. When you say the 14th wave is going to be the strongest one, and we see, we take a picture of like the coastline right now, we see waves crashing all the time. So how do you distinguish, just from a scientific standpoint and a research standpoint, what is a tsunami wave?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just one clarification though, I don't know that the 14th wave will be the largest. I'm just relaying what we're seeing from other places and the tide gauges there. And so what we're looking at, me and my team and the National Tsunami Warning Center and anyone that's interested at home, there are tide gauges out in the water all across the Washington shoreline that record the daily changes in the tide. And we can predict those and we know what they're expected to be. But if you have a strong weather event or a tsunami, there are changes to the predicted tides. And so when you look at those tide gauges, you can see the increase in the water level from the tsunami. And those peaks are the waves, and then the water draws down, and those are the troughs. And you can see that record on the tide gauges. And so measuring how high that is above the normal tide stage is the tsunami wave. And so we can see several tsunami waves in tide gauges across the affected area. And so that's what we're tracking. And then there are also these, they're called the DART buoys, deep assessment transmitter buoys that are monitoring the pressure change on the seafloor. And that's how tsunamis are tracked and forecasted through the National Tsunami Warning Center. And so you can check out these DART buoys to be able to discern what the pressure changes and what the water column is doing in the open ocean. And that's very useful for predicting and forecasting what a tsunami will look like in coastal areas. Yeah. And so that's what we're monitoring.
Yeah, so fascinating in terms of the science here, Corina. And then one last question, when we look at a map, for example, here, obviously the population centers, we have, Seattle, Tacoma, really anything along Elliott Bay. And then you see the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and it kind of is shaped like a like a tunnel, if you will. So if there was a tsunami that were to come through there, is there a possibility that this tsunami could affect some, along the Elliott Bay, along Seattle? Basically, my question is, how far inland could the tsunami potential be?
That's a great question, and we don't know at this time. The advisory is not predicting the wave to go into the Puget Sound. But as I mentioned earlier, the Tsunami Warning Center really doesn't have the granularity necessary for providing forecasts for the Puget Sound. And so at this point, we're just waiting to see what the wave does for the outer coast and for the strait. And that can help us determine what the conditions will be within the Puget Sound. But as of now, it's an unknown. I don't anticipate that there will be significant wave action or extremely strong currents in the Puget Sound or for Elliott Bay, but we're waiting to get more information.
All right. Well, we appreciate your expertise on this, Corina Allen with the Washington Geological Survey. Thank you for joining us this morning. We do appreciate that.
Thanks, Corina.